But you're so hot that I melted. I fell right through the cracks, and then I tried to get back for the love that I've been giving in my blessings. Just gonna try and find an invention. I reckon this is my turn to be somewhere else, but I won't hesitate no more, no more. It cannot run. I'm yours to complicate.
Hello, friends. It's the Menace. Your half-assed report of the guy on the bike, James Kalm, and we are on the Lower East Side. And we're going to try to run into the Shin Gallery and get some glimpses of what I hope will be a very interesting and historical exhibition. Stay tuned. Okay, well, we're going to look at a George Rouault show. Well, I think George Rouault is one of my favorite painters. I'm going to hold it. I think you can freeze your video and you can read that. Just kind of come in initially and make a sweep around here. Boy, so many of these are paintings that I've seen reproduced in art history books. This is Paysans, 1937. Oil on paper laid down on board, laid on canvas. Well, I pedaled past here a couple times in the last month or so and glanced through and saw a Rouault in the window, and I was, of course, intrigued. And then I saw an Instagram post by Dan Cameron saying that they had a whole show here. This is called P-Will. It's oil on canvas, 1937, 38, 35 by 25. Well, I think I talk about my affection for chunky painting. And part of that might come from my early exposure to Rouault. I remember being in Paris in the mid-70s and walking into these galleries with the gray velvet walls, velvet-covered walls. And seeing Rouault's then, it's called the Le Fugitif, so I'm thinking maybe the fugitive. I was going to say also, this is a case where the frames really add a lot to the paintings. Anyway, so I started doing some research on Rouault, found out he was a very interesting character. Was considered part of the Fauve movement, although I think he was actually more of a symbolist. One of the things I like about him is his radiant color. I think the other thing, we were at a Bill Jensen discussion a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about Albert Pinkham Ryder and how Pinkham writer would work on paintings for years and somehow was able to get this glowing effect of the colors. But I think Rouault is another example of someone that worked on the paintings for years and really was able to get a lot of radiance through the overpainting. More paisans. Oil on cardboard, 23 by 15. Oh, I enjoy the program that they have here at the Shin Gallery. I guess this is in collaboration with Skarstedt. So I'm always curious about how someone would come into, at least for an exhibition, would be able to get this many works by a particular artist, especially a classic like Rouault. This is Bouquet, 1939. Oil brush, ink, and paper laid down on canvas, 24 by 19. I was thinking you could cut out a little chunk of this and have a Howard Hodgkins painting or some other kind of abstract expressionist painter. Also, I like the way that there's a painted frame within the frame. And I think one of the other interesting historical facts is that George was the student of Gustave Moreau, I believe was his name, was one of the best recognized, most highly recognized of the symbolist artists. And at some point after his death, Rouault was appointed as the director of his museum. I guess they took his house and studio and converted it into a museum. This is titled Two Judges. Oil on paper laid down on canvas, 7 by 6. I think that Rouault did a whole study of or a series of paintings dealing with judges, criminals, prostitutes, all kind of the downtrodden. People thought he was kind of into the abject, which he was. This is called Vieux Fauve, 1946 to 49. There's another interesting story, which is that Rouault was working with Ambroise Voillard as his art dealer, and Voillard made some kind of a deal which he wanted exclusivity on all of his paintings, but that he would provide him with a studio and I guess paint, so as long as he was painting and working, he didn't have to worry about that. And at some point, Voillard passed away, and his children said, time for you to make good on your deal. Okay, this is Satan, 1929, 1939, oil on board. Anyway, the kids say, time for you to make good on your deal. And they locked him out of his studio, and I guess there were hundreds of paintings in there. And Rouault said, you can't have the paintings because the paintings are not finished. And, well, they had a legal dispute. I guess it went to court for 6 or 8 years, something like that. And eventually, Rouault won the case. titled Nativity, 1953, so this is one of the very late pieces. Anyway, he won the case, got access to a studio, and at some point before he died, he took about 300 paintings. He said, I'm too old, I'm in my 70s now, I'm never going to be able to finish these. And he publicly burned them. And I was looking at some statement online saying that that could have been something like the equivalent of burning $500 million worth of paintings. This one's got a really great frame on here. It's like, so Rouault constantly was reworking these, but it was also, he had a list of subjects that he worked with. A lot of them were religious based. So that must be the birth of Christ and maybe the wise men coming in. I think this one maybe gives you an example of his overlaid brushwork more than any of the other pieces we've seen so far. It's titled Figure in Profile, 1945 to 46, oil and paper mounted on canvas. So this is another one of his subjects. I guess you could consider this a woman of the night. She's got her red stockings on. Oh gosh, is that his signature right in the middle there? So one of the things I was reading was that Rouault was so well known when he died, I guess in the mid-50s, that he had a state-sponsored funeral, which no artist up to that time had ever had. And they were saying it's ironic because this is someone whose career has definitely dropped into the twilight. And I mean, I've always been a fan of his work, and I think that there's a lot of young contemporary artists that have been biting on a lot of his ideas for years. It's a dancer and a clown. 1934, oil and paper laid down on canvas. I was thinking the other thing, I'm wondering, because he's using such chunky paint and he's really building these things up over time, whether there was something about starting out on the paper that made it part of his process. I don't know. I would think that just building up on canvas would be maybe the best way to provide for adhesion. This is titled Still Life with Oranges, 1953, oil on paper. The other thing is, looking at these in real life, you realize that there's a lot of really straight, bold colors coming through, and Rouault kind of toned them down with layers of kind of scumbled tans and tawnies, earth tones and grays, but then he kept coming back in and building it up again with the intense colors. Well, there should be another room to the exhibition, except they've closed it because they had problems with leakage. Well, when I was here Thursday, they'd had a leak here, and so they closed off the front section of the gallery, but I started thinking about this and said, I've got to come back. This is like a museum quality show. Oh boy. It's titled Girl, Rose. And this is one of the early Rouaults. This is watercolor gouache and pastel on paper mounted on board. as I remember, it was Rouault actually got his first recognition for his work that he was doing on paper, and a lot of it was dealing with prostitutes, judges, criminals, the people on the street. But he always had this heavy outline, and even though you can't work a watercolor and ink piece as much as you can keep overpainting a work on oil, there's a lot of overlays on there. There's also another wonderful piece. This is Acrobat number 13, 1913. This is 41 by 29. And gosh, just look at the dynamic lines of these arms and the shoulders. I did some research and listened to some podcasts since I was here last, and they make a point of talking about what a devout Christian Rouault was. And so even in some of these pieces, you would assume this is just an acrobat, maybe flexing his muscles, but you've got this character here who almost looks like he's got a little halo around his head. And again, this is one of the works on paper. This is Louisetta, 1946. Oil on paper mounted on board, on board, 11 by 7 and 5/8. And while I was looking at this and noticing this shadow around her chin, it was making me think of somebody wearing a COVID mask, but I don't think that would be quite accurate. But as I was saying, even though these pieces have got a lot of browns, beiges, midtones, earth tones, there's always this interceding layers of pretty bright, intense colors. It's like passage biblique, a biblical passage. This is 1940 to 1948, oil, gouache, and ink on paper, laid down on canvas. So I was talking about how Rouault was a real true believer, a true Christian, and I guess part of his practice would be the devout job of working on these and painting on them and trying to bring about some kind of almost a divine quality. Stella Mattia Passion. But it wasn't too many years after Walt got some recognition that a whole lot of abstract painters just started biting on his method. Thinking of Nicolas de Stadia would be someone that did a lot of overpainting and scraping and layering. This is Christ with the children. 10 by 8 1/4. Oil on cradle panel. Got a little crackle in there. Well, I was also talking about the fact that Rouault had a lawsuit at the end of his life, and it was about who actually owned a lot of his paintings. I guess he had a studio that was paid for by the deal of Vollard, and at some point he passed away, and so the children wanted to settle the deal, but Rouault didn't want to give up the paintings until he knew they were finished, and so he sort of hung on to them and kept working on them and working on them and working on them. This is 1930, this is gouache and pastel on and Chinese ink on paper. That's interesting because although he did kind of stick to a certain number of themes, he also continued to kind of use the same technique over decades and decades. Oh, this is a beauty. Calling this Clown Anglais, 1937. So I think that the framing elements are very important, and well, there's a certain kind of objecthood when you're dealing with a painting and you put it in a frame and it becomes more than just a flat two-dimensional representation of something, when it actually starts to have a thingness, a physical presence. And but I love the little scumbled lines, the nubby outlines here, and they were saying that one of the reasons that he did this was that he started out his art practice painting glass, and spent a lot of time, I guess, maybe restoring stained glass. Oh, this one is a real gem. Theodora, circa 1949, oil on cardboard laid down on cradled panel. I was talking about his use of the frame, and this is another one of those great paintings that has the frame painted on and then the frame added on around that. Let's see what the date is. 1949, but I'm sure that he worked on this for years. It would also be interesting to know whether or not they've varnished these or restored them somehow, because they have such wonderful rich surfaces. No, they really do have the quality of the Byzantine icon. Well, I'm glad I came back. Gosh, it was worth it just for that piece. James Kalm reporting on George Rouault here at the Shin Gallery on Orchard and Grand. You can like this. Share and look it up on all your social media sites, You can leave your thoughts, ideas, comments, criticisms, reviews, and suggestions below. I just hope you've enjoyed this. This is really museum quality stuff. And we always like to say, thank you, Kate.